everyone, Crow here, and a couple days ago, Technomancer1 warned me several times that Space Invaders would be invading YouTube and my channel, and indeed they are. So this will be my little contribution to this, and that is that I am going to do a mini review on every single Space Invaders game I have, except for the DS version because I can't film footage for it very easily. So I will do a mini review for Space Invaders on the Atari 2600, Space Invaders on the Atari 8-bit computers, which I'll play on my XEGS, Space Invaders for the Atari 5200, Space Invaders 91 for the Genesis, and Space Invaders for the Super Nintendo. And since that allots me less than 2 minutes per review, I will cut to the footage.
Alright, first up we have Space Invaders on the Atari 2600, and this I believe was the very first killer app for any video game system. Basically, when this game came out for the Atari 2600, it made people want to run out and buy the 2600 just so they could play this game. Now, there's not as many invaders on the screen as there are in the arcade version, but you know, even me as a kid, I never played like Space Invaders in the arcade. I've actually never seen an arcade version of Space Invaders, and that's because by the time I was actually old enough to go to arcades and actually know what I was looking at, it was already by around the mid-'80s and so, and there were really no Space Invaders machines around. And since I grew up with this version, this is my version of Space Invaders. This is the version I grew up, you know, whenever somebody said Space Invaders, this is the version I immediately think of. And this port in particular is very good. The controls are very responsive. You have novice and difficulty settings, the difficulty being that you can make your ship bigger and easier to hit. And if I remember correctly, there's about 101 game variation, including invisible invaders, moving barriers, and just moving bullets, just crazy stuff. And also, before I move on, there's a hidden secret in this game, and that is if you hold down the reset button while you're turning on the system, you then get the cheat and shoot 2 bullets on the screen at once instead of 1. And that's a trick I learned not too long ago, maybe a year or so ago. But as for this Atari 2600 version of Space Invaders, I give it a very, very, very high score. I'm not going to be specific, but it is an excellent game. If you have a 2600, most likely you have this game. And if you don't have it, well, you certainly need to find it, because you're going to find it for less than $1. Moving on to the next game. And this is the Atari 8-bit computer version of Space Invaders, which I happen to be playing on my Atari XEGS. Now, this game came out in 1982, and I think they felt that they wanted to take advantage of the hardware more. So what they did was they changed the invaders around. They put a rocket ship and had the invaders come out of the rocket ship, which I think is kind of goofy. You just pick them off while they come out at the beginning until you get faster and faster. And you know, there's a lot more animation, and I think as you get later in the game, you get different types of invaders. But there are some things which I think make this version not as good as a 2600 version. For one, I think there's only like 12 or 13 game modes, and none of them have invisible invaders, and none of them even have the barriers, which I find very strange. But other than that, the game works pretty well. You know, I just kind of miss those familiar Space Invader faces that you're used to shooting down. Instead, you got these weird animated characters. At least they look weird to me. I mean, I'm sure some people like them, but you know, it's just a notch down. It just doesn't have that familiar Space Invaders feel. In fact, it kind of feels like a Space Invaders clone. Now, I would move on to the Atari 5200 version, but it's practically identically the same game. In fact, I'm fairly certain it's the same game, since the Atari 5200 has basically the same hardware as the Atari 8-bit computer line. The only difference is that they adapted the cartridge to work with the 5200 and, you know, not having, you know, the buttons that are on that system itself. Now, I would actually show footage of the Atari 5200 version, but for some reason I could not get my 5200 to power on. I think I need a new power supply for it. And it's a shame too, because the 5200 version might actually be control better than the 8-bit computer, and the 8-bit computer actually uses like a regular joystick. And you may be thinking, well, doesn't the Atari 5200 have that really crappy analog controller? And you'd be right. And you know, that controller really doesn't work well for Space Invaders, but what the Atari 5200 does have is a trackball, and the Space Invaders actually works with the trackball for the Atari 5200, and it just makes for awesome controls. I mean, controlling your ship with a trackball gives you the precision you never had with a joystick. And it kind of makes me wish that even the Atari 2600 version had paddle support, because I'm sure that with the paddle, you'd have a lot more fun with the game, and you'd be able to get a lot higher score and more precision shots, and be able to dodge out of the way quicker. I mean, I just think the game would be awesome with a paddle, regardless of whether or not the arcade version had. I don't know. I don't know if the arcade version actually used a joystick. I think it basically had left and right buttons and fire, basically 3-button layout. But yeah, paddle support would have been awesome in the Atari 2600 version, and that's, you know, with the Atari 5200, you get close to that with the trackball version. And I kind of went a little bit off topic, but let's move on to the next version of Space Invaders. Alright, next up we have Space Invaders 91, which was actually released in 1991. Now, this version of Space Invaders is a really dramatic upgrade from the original Space Invaders. The first level does look a lot like Space Invaders, but you got the background music, you got the nice colorful graphics in the background, and the biggest change, I think, is the fact that when you hit the UFO that hovers above, a power-up drops down that you can use. I think I actually do hit it here, and this gave me some kind of weird it's just multiple ships popped out, and I was able to shoot them all. And it's a very fun game. Yeah, because not only do you have your power-ups, but after the first level, the invaders start acting differently. So they'll start moving in different patterns. They stop shooting straight down. They'll shoot on angles sometimes. They'll shoot different types of missiles, sometimes even homing missiles. And occasionally there'll be a thing that would pop, float across the screen like UFO, but then drop down to the side of the screen and try and pull you towards the side of the screen, making it more difficult for you to line up your shots. And it's just all these different power-ups that keep the old Space Invaders formula from getting stale. So this is a very good upgrade from the original Space Invaders. And finally, moving on to the last Space Invaders game. And the last game is Space Invaders on the Super Nintendo, which is a return to the original Space Invaders. And you have a couple of options on how you want to play the original version. You could play it with the original black and white graphics with the simulated background, or you could play it in just black and white, or you could play it with a simulated rainbow cellophane overlay over the graphics, or you could actually play the colored version of Space Invaders, where the invaders actually change colors as they get closer to you. And it's kind of funny, the whole screen turns red when you get hit. Pretty interesting. And there's also a versus mode I really didn't get a chance to try out because I didn't have anyone else to play with. And what's also cool about it is it tries to simulate the arcade feeling of the game, even right down to the fact that you have to hit the right shoulder pad to simulate inserting a coin to play. And what we're looking at right here is the regular version of Space Invaders with the simulated, the colorful moon landscape in the background. And here's the black and white version of the game. And here's that weird black and white version with the rainbow cellophane over the screen simulated look. And here's the colored version of Space Invaders, where the invaders actually change colors the closer they get to the bottom of the screen. Now, this version of Space Invaders is all well and good, but what's really ridiculous about this version is it didn't come out till 1997, which is well after the PlayStation had already come out. So to release this game is just kind of bizarre in my opinion, because even MAME was out and you could emulate these Space Invader games on MAME too. But I suppose somebody with a Super Nintendo back in those days might and love Space Invaders would be interested in this game. And this game isn't all that much either. I mean, I picked up a sealed copy of this for less than $10. But yeah, this is a pretty good version of Space Invaders. It's just the time it came out was pretty weird. Well, that pretty much concludes it all. So with that, I'll see you all next time. Bye.